The sky bled a soft amber hue as the sun dipped below the hills, casting long shadows across the valley. In the once bustling town of Pinefall, silence had become law, not by decree of man, but by fear. Not a whisper, not a cough, not even the rustle of a newspaper. The town had learned the hard way. Sound meant death. It started 7 months ago. People called them the listeners. No one knew where they came from. No one saw them arrive. But one by one, Pinefall's residents vanished, always after a noise. A dropped spoon, a slammed door, a baby's cry. They weren't spirits. Not quite demons either. What they were, no one could say for certain. They moved through the fog like liquid shadow, drawn to the faintest sound, swift and silent. By the time you heard them, it was too late. The story begins with a man named Elias Thorne, a former history teacher turned survivalist. His beard had grown thick, eyes hollow from sleepless nights, but there was a sharpness to him, a vigilance that came from living with fear every single second. He lived alone now. His wife, Mara, had been taken. A month after the first disappearance, she had whispered Elias' name in the dead of night. A whisper. That was all it took. Elias had watched, paralyzed, as the shadows slithered beneath the door, forming shapes that should not exist in any natural world. She had screamed once, short, sharp, silenced. Now, Elias didn't speak. He didn't even breathe loudly. Every window in his house was triple-paned and sealed. He lined the floors with soft rugs, replaced all doorknobs with fabric loops, and slept inside a soundproof closet he'd padded with old mattresses. But even he was beginning to lose grip. One frigid morning, Elias noticed something chilling. Footprints in the snow outside his home. Bare feet. Small. They hadn't come from the woods. They had come from under the shed. His heart clenched. No one had been under that shed in years. Slowly, he stepped out, his boots pressing softly into the frost. He knelt and peeked beneath the rusted frame. A face looked back. Small, pale, eyes wide as coins. A girl. She was no older than 10. Her mouth trembled, but she didn't speak. Instead, she held out a small, blood-stained note. Elias took it carefully. The message was written in red marker. Please, help. They took my brother. He screamed. That night, Elias couldn't sleep. Who was she? Where did she come from? How had she survived? He sat in the dark, staring at the note, weighing his next move. The smart choice, the silent choice, was to do nothing. Let her disappear. Better her than him. But something inside him stirred. Something long buried. Guilt. Humanity. A memory of his wife's final look as the shadows consumed her. He couldn't ignore the girl. At dawn, he returned to the shed. She was still there, curled like a wounded animal. He motioned with his fingers. Come quietly. She crawled out, limbs shaking from the cold. Her name was Lena. He didn't ask for her story. He couldn't. He only gestured for her to follow. Step by step, they moved toward the house like ghosts. Once inside, he showed her the rules, pointed silently to signs around the house. No shoes, no metal, no taps, no crying. She nodded. No questions asked. In a world like this, children learned fast. 4 days, they didn't speak. Instead, they communicated in writing and gestures. Elias learned that Lena and her brother, Caleb, had hidden in a root cellar when the creatures arrived. They'd survived for weeks, until Caleb had dropped a glass jar. She hadn't seen him since. But the worst part? The shadows didn't take him right away. She heard him screaming for hours. Lena had hope, though. She believed Caleb might still be alive. She spoke of a place beyond the ridge, an old water treatment plant, where she thought he might have been dragged. She begged Elias to help her search. At first, he refused. It was madness. The road to the plant passed through the thicket, a dense stretch of trees where sound echoed for miles. It was a death trap, but Lena wouldn't give up. Every night, she left hand-drawn maps beside his bed. Every morning, she drew pictures of her brother, his smile, his freckles, the green hoodie he always wore. Elias' heart cracked. It wasn't just about survival anymore. On the 6th night, something changed. Elias woke to the sound of scratching. Soft, rhythmic, coming from the walls. He bolted upright, grabbing his flashlight, heart pounding. The scratching grew louder. He turned the beam to the corner and froze. Lena stood facing the wall, hand moving rapidly, clawing with her nails. Her eyes were open, but glassy, as though in a trance. He whispered, too loudly, "Lena." She turned slowly, her mouth opened, and for the first time, he heard her voice. "They're under us." The room went cold. Elias leapt forward, clapping a hand over her mouth, dragging her to the closet. He barely had time to close the padded door before he heard it. The creaking of the front step. Then, silence. Dead, empty silence. Something was inside. The sound of wet dragging across the floor. Slow, deliberate, searching. Lena trembled against him, silent tears cutting down her cheeks. They stayed that way for what felt like hours. When it was over, when the floorboards no longer cried under invisible weight, they waited another hour before daring to move. Elias knew then. They weren't safe here anymore. The creatures were getting smarter, hungrier, and somehow, Lena was connected to them. Whether it was her dreams, her brother, or something darker, he didn't know. But if they stayed, they'd both be taken. He made a choice. They would head for the water plant. They would find Caleb, or die trying. The next morning, he packed 2 bags, just the essentials. Padded boots, a sound-dampened map, jerky, flashlights with blackout filters, a flare in case of absolute emergency, and a revolver with 2 bullets. Just 2. Lena watched without speaking. She knew. At the edge of the woods, Elias turned to her and pointed to a final sign. "Stay quiet, or be taken." She nodded. Then they stepped into the trees. Behind them, the house stood still. But in the shadows of the attic, something moved. Something that watched them leave. And smiled. The forest loomed ahead like the mouth of some ancient beast, black and endless. The thicket had its name for a reason. Trees grew too close together, their branches clawing at each other like tangled limbs. Even the wind seemed afraid to whisper here. Elias motioned to Lena to step carefully. He'd wrapped their boots in cloth, reinforced the seams with rubber tape, and packed strips of foam under their soles. Every inch of preparation mattered now, because here, in the thicket, a snapped twig could mean your last breath. They walked in silence. Every movement was calculated. When branches blocked their path, they crawled under them. When leaves crunched too loudly, they backed up and found another way. The air was thick, not just with fog, but with dread. Lena clutched a worn photograph of Caleb in one hand, eyes darting at every sound. The rustle of a squirrel, the drip of condensation from above, even her own breathing. She looked smaller here, swallowed by trees older than memory. But something else was wrong. There were no birds, no animals, no sound but them. An hour in, they came across a rusted van, half consumed by moss. Elias peered inside. The windows were broken, the backseat torn open, red-stained handprints on the roof. He signaled for Lena to stay back. Then he saw them, scratches etched into the interior wall. Deep, frantic. A message. We tried to whisper. It wasn't quiet enough. Below it, a symbol, a spiral, jagged, bleeding outward. Elias had seen it once before, on the side of a barn where an entire family vanished overnight. It wasn't a mark. It was a warning. The listeners had been here. Recently. They moved faster now, but not carelessly. The map Lena had drawn showed the water plant only 2 miles ahead. It used to supply the town with clean water, but now it was abandoned, shut down when the attacks began. Elias wondered, why would they bring Caleb there? What do they want with the Taken? As the thought echoed in his mind, a new sound broke through the silence. A bell. Faint, distant, ringing once, then again. Lena froze. Elias turned slowly. That bell wasn't natural. It wasn't wind chime light or rusted metal dull. It was perfect. Almost too perfect. Like it was calling someone. Or luring them. They pressed forward. Another half-mile in, the fog grew denser, blurring the trees into moving shapes. Elias began to hallucinate. He thought he saw a figure in the mist, standing with arms outstretched. But when he blinked, it was gone. Lena tugged on his sleeve and pointed. There, ahead, nestled between the trees, was a collapsed hunting shack. Its roof had caved, but a small fire pit inside was still warm. Someone had been here. Elias examined the ashes. Fresh embers, burnt fabric, and in the corner, a shoe. Small, green. Lena gasped, nearly made a sound, but caught herself. Elias knelt and held the shoe gently. It was Caleb's. They weren't alone. The shadows between the trees began to move. At first, Elias thought it was wind. But no, they were moving against the wind. He backed away from the fire pit, motioning to Lena to hide. She crouched behind a log, clutching her photo of Caleb like a shield. And then it came. A voice. But not a person's. Not fully. It echoed like a child's whisper inside a metal drum. Familiar, but wrong. Ilyas. He stiffened. No one had said his name in months. Come closer. She's waiting. Lena's eyes widened. She heard it too. The voice sounded like Mara, his wife. But Mara was dead. Wasn't she? Elias knew better than to trust a voice in the woods. But the forest played tricks, and the voice knew exactly how to weaken him. Still, he stayed rooted. Then Lena pointed in panic. Behind him. A shape. Tall. Stretching between trees like melted tar. A listener. It wasn't moving. Not yet. But it was listening. Elias gently reached for his foam-wrapped flare, but the whisper came again. Closer this time. You left me. She'll leave you too. His hands shook. The shape began to ripple. To slide forward like liquid shadow wearing a man's form. Lena stepped out suddenly. And screamed. Just one word. Run! The forest exploded into chaos. The listener shrieked. An inhuman, hollow, echoing sound that shook the branches. Elias grabbed Lena's arm and ran. No more careful steps. No more silence. The trees became a blur. Vines tore at their clothes. Roots tried to trip them. Behind them, the listener moved impossibly fast, gliding between shadows, leaping across branches. They ran until the fog began to clear. Until the trees parted. Until they reached the clearing. The water plant. It stood like a decaying fortress, tall, windowless, wrapped in rust and ivy. Pipes jutted out like broken bones, and a massive door, half ajar, led into the darkness within. Elias pulled Lena inside, slammed the door, and for the first time in days, they were not followed. Inside, the air was thick with mold and metal. A single red emergency light blinked in the corner. Lena turned to him, tears streaking her face. Elias looked down at her and whispered his first words in weeks. We don't scream again. Ever. She nodded, then pointed toward a dark hallway. Footsteps echoed. Someone was still inside. The air inside the water treatment plant felt heavier than the forest. Not just damp, pressurized. Like something beneath the surface was humming, waiting. Elias held his breath and pressed Lena behind him. The emergency light blinked every 3 seconds, painting the hallway in pulsing red. 1, 2, flash. A shadow at the end of the corridor. Gone. Lena tapped Elias's wrist twice. Their silent code for "Did you see that?" He nodded. There was something, or someone, still inside. They moved slowly through the rusted halls, past broken machinery and flooded stairwells. The building had once purified water. Now it reeked of mildew, iron, and something sweet and rotten. The red blinking led them to a sign overhead. Maintenance Sector B, Biofilter Sublevels. Below it, faint handprints streaked the wall, small ones. A trail, leading deeper. Lena pointed. Hope flashed in her eyes. Caleb. But Elias didn't move. He crouched and felt the floor. Warm. That wasn't possible. The plant had no power. unless someone, or something, was generating it. They pressed forward, down a rusted stairwell. Water dripped steadily, the only sound allowed. At the bottom, a thick steel door stood slightly open. From within, the flicker of fluorescent light and the sound of whispers. Not voices. Whispers. Lead. Endless. Thousands of them, just beyond hearing. Elias swallowed hard and pushed the door open. Inside was a vast chamber, once a filtration room, now stripped bare. The concrete walls were scrawled with messages, written in red ink or maybe blood. Don't listen. They speak in your voice. He's still here, just quieter. Whispers feed them. In the center of the room was a circle of chairs, maybe 24. In each sat a person, unmoving, eyes open, mouths sealed shut with duct tape. Their heads twitched every few seconds, like they were trying to scream from inside their own minds. Whispering. Lena gasped, nearly audibly, and darted forward toward one of them. Elias hissed and grabbed her, but it was too late. The man she ran to was small, barely a teenager, wearing a torn green hoodie. Caleb. His mouth was taped. His eyes moved wildly. Tears streamed down his cheeks. Lena trembled and reached to pull the tape, but Elias stopped her. Behind Caleb's chair, scratched into the floor in jagged letters, were the words, "Don't unseal them. They are bait." Elias stepped back, heart pounding. They weren't dead. They weren't alive either. They were kept here, silenced, as warnings, or worse, traps. Lena didn't care. She reached forward anyway, and tore the tape from Caleb's face. Silence. Then, "Lena," he croaked, his voice dry and cracking. They made me listen." And then he screamed. A long, broken, desperate scream. The room came alive. The lights flickered. The whispers grew louder, no longer faint, but screaming inside their heads. The bodies in the chairs twitched violently. One by one, their mouths ripped open, even through the tape, and they screamed with Caleb. Echoing. Sinking. The whispers weren't coming from the walls. They were coming from the mouths. Elias grabbed Lena and pulled her back. But Caleb was still screaming. And something was coming. From the hallway they came. Shadows wrapped in bone and muscle, crawling on walls, dragging themselves with hands too long, too many fingers. Mouths sewn shut, yet vibrating. Listeners. But they weren't here for Elias. Or Lena. They were here for the scream. They surrounded Caleb, who sat shaking, still bound, unable to run. One shadow tilted its head. Then a long, wet blade emerged from its hand, not metal, but bone. And it cut the scream from his throat. No blood, no death, just silence. The scream vanished midair. Caleb went limp, eyes open, still alive, but no longer himself. Elias knew then, the creatures fed on sound, but not just any sound. Emotion, terror, raw, human screams. They didn't just kill, they harvested. He pulled Lena into a drainage tunnel, ducking out as the shadows fed. Her face was pale, her hands shaking. Caleb wasn't dead, but something inside him was. They crawled through the tunnel for what felt like hours, emerging deep in the lower sector. Elias collapsed against the wall, breath shallow. Then Lena spoke, barely a whisper. "I heard them, before we got here." He turned. "In my dreams, they said they're not here to kill." Pause. "They are collecting." Elias felt his stomach drop. Collecting what? Lena looked up at him, her eyes dull. Voices. Suddenly, from deeper in the plant, a new sound echoed. A woman's scream. Familiar. Elias froze. Mara. The scream hadn't come from memory. It hadn't been imagined. It was real. Elias stood frozen in the drainage tunnel, lungs barely moving. The scream he just heard, shrill, broken, filled with a kind of fear only he would recognize, was Mara's. Lena stared at him, wide-eyed. "You heard it too," she whispered. He didn't answer. He couldn't. His legs moved before his mind caught up. They pushed deeper into the facility, past collapsed walls, through corroded access shafts, and into areas that no blueprint had ever marked. The screams didn't repeat, but they echoed. Somehow, the sound lingered. It was as if the building itself remembered them. They entered a chamber unlike any other. The ceiling rose high above them, cathedral-like, filled with steel beams and dangling cables like veins. In the center was a circular platform, surrounded by massive glass tubes that pulsed with light and sound. Tiny vibrations filled the room, like a heartbeat made of whispers. The air vibrated, and inside the tubes, people, dozens of them, floating in a gel-like suspension. Eyes open, mouths moving, but no sound came out. Elias stepped forward, his hand trembling. Each tube had a nameplate. Most were scratched out, but one still bore a name. Mara Thorne. Subject 041. Status: active. His heart nearly stopped. Inside the tube, her body floated, pale, weightless, hair flowing in slow motion like smoke underwater. She looked alive. Her eyes were shut. Then, as if sensing him, they opened, directly at Elias. He reached for the console beside the tube, a cracked keypad and a series of levers. Lena stepped closer, whispering, "Is that her?" He nodded. Then, a voice behind them. "She screamed for you." They turned. A figure stepped out of the shadows. Not a listener. A man. White lab coat, torn and bloodstained. Face sunken, eyes wild with sleepless madness. A name tag barely clung to his chest. Dr. Harlan Vess. "I kept her for you," he rasped. Her voice was strong. It fed the grid for weeks. Almost broke containment. He smiled, a cracked, unnatural grin. "She's one of the few we couldn't mute." Elias raised his revolver. Dr. Vess didn't flinch. "You can kill me, but it won't help. You think the listeners evolved? No, we built them." The words hit like ice. "You made them." Vess nodded. "Bioweapons. Designed during Black Winter. Meant to seek and destroy hostile insurgents by tracking sound. But they turned on us. We couldn't stop them, so we studied them instead. Contained them." He gestured to the tubes. "Then we learned they feed on more than noise. They feed on emotion, memory, identity. Your wife, oh, she was beautiful. Her pain was perfect." Elias fired. The shot echoed like thunder in the chamber. Vess collapsed, blood pouring from his throat. But it was already too late. The sound had triggered them. Somewhere in the facility, the listeners stirred. Lights dimmed. Tubes flickered. A siren began to wail. Release protocol initiated. The tubes began to drain. Mara's eyes widened. Her hands pressed against the glass. Her mouth moved, silently, but the scream, her scream, came from every wall, every pipe, every surface at once. 100 overlapping voices. A storm of sound. Lena grabbed Elias. "We have to go." But he couldn't leave her. He slammed his fist into the console. Sparks flew. One lever snapped, the emergency override. Mara's tube hissed, and the front panel slid open. Water gushed out, and she collapsed into Elias's arms, coughing, shaking. She was real. Alive. But not whole. Her voice was gone. Just hollow breath and broken sobs. Elias held her, whispering, "I'm here." I never stopped looking. But time was up. The floor began to vibrate. The chamber lights burst one by one. From above, the listeners descended. Dozens of them, writhing across the ceiling, crawling down the walls. Each with mouths stitched shut. Each vibrating like a tuning fork of death. They didn't attack immediately. They surrounded, waiting. Then Lena stepped forward. Her small voice rose, calm but trembling. "I can give them what they want." Elias turned. "No." She held up her notebook, opened to a page. A phrase was scrawled across it dozens of times. "They follow pain. They eat fear. But they listen to me." She dropped the book and screamed. Not a frightened cry, but a controlled, focused, inhumanly loud scream. It echoed through the chamber, ripping into the shadows, shattering lights, forcing the listeners to reel back. They shrieked in return, their bodies pulsing violently. Some even burst, spraying dark mist across the walls. But it wasn't over, because behind the listeners, something bigger was coming. In the far wall, a door creaked open. No light inside, just a shape, massive, a listener, but ancient, twice the size of the others. Its body made of twisted flesh and wires. Dozens of mouths sealed shut along its chest. Its name whispered from Mara's lips, the only word she could manage. The Collector. The chamber fell silent. The Collector stepped through the doorway like a god of the dead, towering, grotesque, stitched together from remnants of the things it had taken. It didn't walk. It glided, dragging its weightless bulk across the ground as if reality bent beneath it. It wasn't hunting. It was claiming. Elias held Mara tightly, shielding her behind the steel console. She could barely stand, lips trembling, eyes distant. Whatever the Collector had done to her voice, it wasn't just silence. It was emptiness. Lena stood at the front, arms trembling, the last of her scream echoing off the walls. The smaller listeners had backed away into the shadows, hissing, hiding. They feared the Collector too, but not because it would destroy them, because it consumed them. The Collector paused beneath the overhead lights, which flickered one final time, then died. Darkness. Total. Then a sound, sickening, wet and sharp. A mouth opening. Not one, but many. On its chest, its back, even its palms. A chorus of hollow, distorted voices emerged, stitched together, broken. Some were Caleb's. Some were Mara's. Some were Elias's. He froze. It spoke, in 100 overlapping whispers. You came, for what we already own. Lena whispered to Elias, voice tight with fear. They're all inside it. Every voice they've taken. It doesn't just kill, it keeps them. The Collector raised one long arm. Shadows around the room began to bend toward it like smoke in reverse, absorbing every sound, memory, every shiver of fear. Elias stood, raising his revolver with shaking hands. Only one bullet left. Mara clutched his coat, as if begging him not to waste it. But he wasn't aiming at the Collector. He looked at Lena. She nodded. She knew what needed to be done. Lena stepped forward and pulled something from her backpack, a small, sealed glass canister. Elias remembered it. A backup flare, but not just heat or light. Sound reactive. A military prototype, designed to emit a deafening frequency if broken. Lena placed it on the ground between herself and the Collector, then looked back. Tears ran down her cheeks, but her voice was steady. I can still make it scream. Elias took Mara's hand, pulled her behind the thick filtration tank, shielded her ears. Then, Lena stomped. The glass shattered. Sound erupted. A scream louder than thunder, louder than pain, louder than anything the Collector had ever heard. The blast ripped through the chamber, cracking stone, bursting pipes, shattering every glass tube. The listeners howled. Some collapsed, others turned to mist. But the Collector, it screamed back. A deep, tortured, metallic shriek. It writhed in the air, its mouth spasming. The voices it had stolen escaped, echoing into the air like ghosts set free. For a brief second, Mara gasped. Her voice returned. Just one word. Elias. Then the chamber exploded. Not with fire, but with silence. A deafening absence. And then, nothing. Epilogue. 3 weeks later, outside Pinefall. Snow drifted gently across the hills. The listeners were gone. No one knew why. Some said the power grid failed. Others claimed the government deployed weapons to finish what it started. But Elias knew better. He stood alone at a wooden marker outside town. A child's scarf, blue and red, fluttered in the breeze, wrapped around a metal canister, long since cracked. He whispered. She was the loudest of us all. Mara stood behind him, hand in his. She didn't speak often now, but when she did, her voice was her own. In the wind, sometimes, you could hear it. A girl's laugh, echoing gently. Not trapped, not taken, just free. The chamber fell silent. The collector stepped through the doorway like a god of the dead, towering, grotesque, stitched together from remnants of the things it had taken. It didn't walk. It glided, dragging its weightless bulk across the ground as if reality bent beneath it. It wasn't hunting. It was claiming. Elias held Mara tightly, shielding her behind the steel console. She could barely stand, lips trembling, eyes distant. Whatever the collector had done to her voice, it wasn't just silence. It was emptiness. Lena stood at the front, arms trembling, the last of her scream echoing off the walls. The smaller listeners had backed away into the shadows, hissing, hiding. They feared the collector too, but not because it would destroy them, because it consumed them. The collector paused beneath the overhead lights, which flickered one final time, then died. Darkness. Total. Then a sound, sickening, wet and sharp. A mouth opening. Not one, but many. On its chest, its back, even its palms. A chorus of hollow, distorted voices emerged, stitched together, broken. Some were Caleb's. Some were Mara's. Some were Elias's. He froze. It spoke, in 100 overlapping whispers. You came, for what we already own. Lena whispered to Elias, voice tight with fear. They're all inside it. Every voice they've taken. It doesn't just kill, it keeps them. The collector raised one long arm. Shadows around the room began to bend toward it like smoke in reverse, absorbing every sound, memory, every shiver of fear. Elias stood, raising his revolver with shaking hands. Only one bullet left. Mara clutched his coat, as if begging him not to waste it. But he wasn't aiming at the collector. He looked at Lena. She nodded. She knew what needed to be done. Lena stepped forward and pulled something from her backpack, a small, sealed glass canister. Elias remembered it. A backup flare, but not just heat or light. Sound reactive. A military prototype, designed to emit a deafening frequency if broken. Lena placed it on the ground between herself and the collector, then looked back. Tears ran down her cheeks, but her voice was steady. I can still make it scream. Elias took Mara's hand, pulled her behind the thick filtration tank, shielded her ears. Then, Lena stomped. The glass shattered. Sound erupted. A scream louder than thunder, louder than pain, louder than anything the collector had ever heard. The blast ripped through the chamber, cracking stone, bursting pipes, shattering every glass tube. The listeners howled. Some collapsed. Others turned to mist. But the collector, it screamed back. A deep, tortured, metallic shriek. It writhed in the air, its mouth spasming. The voices it had stolen escaped, echoing into the air like ghosts set free. For a brief second, Mara gasped. Her voice returned. Just one word. Elias. Then the chamber exploded. Not with fire, but with silence. A deafening absence. And then, nothing. Epilogue. 3 weeks later, outside Pinefall. Snow drifted gently across the hills. The listeners were gone. No one knew why. Some said the power grid failed. Others claimed the government deployed weapons to finish what it started. But Elias knew better. He stood alone at a wooden marker outside town. A child's scarf, blue and red, fluttered in the breeze, wrapped around a metal canister, long since cracked. He whispered. She was the loudest of us all. Mara stood behind him, hand in his. She didn't speak often now, but when she did, her voice was her own. In the wind, sometimes, you could hear it. A girl's laugh, echoing gently. Not trapped, not taken, just free.